I did have an inquisitive mind. Even at 4, I can remember thinking about God and wondering where we all came from. My parents weren't Christians, although my dad was pro-Christian. But when I went to boarding school at the age of 8, one of the things that was required was to have a Bible. And I was given a copy of the Bible. I think it was a King James version, I'm not sure. I can remember reading what Jesus did and how he handled his enemies, which was love your enemies. And I knew from that point that truth made me think, I'm sure he must be God to say that. I prayed to the name of Jesus, and it said, anybody who calls upon the name of the Lord will be saved. And after a while I said to the Lord, well, Lord, I've done my bit. I've prayed to you. So if you are real, it's up to you. If your word is true, then, the ball's in your court now, because I've done my bit. So there was a big break in my life when I didn't think about God at all. Then when I was 21, I just graduated and I went over to America to work as a drama camp counsellor, teaching kids drama. And I met a girl called Lynn, and we decided that since we both had time after our 8-week stint working there, we'd travel around the States together for a window of about 3 or 4 days before catching our flight back to the UK. When we got to this rest stop, Lynn we'd brushed our teeth and cleaned our faces for the evening, and we were going to find somewhere to sleep, but Lynn wanted to look for her camera. And we were taking all this stuff out of the car. And we'd just finished putting it back when this man came with a bandana around his face and a small gun. And he said, give me your money. And he grabbed Lynn's handbag from the boot. Now, Lynn's handbag had her passport in it. And she wasn't going to have that. So she's about 24 at this time. She's quite well built and quite protective towards me as well. And she was the one who did all the driving. I'd only just got my test at this point. And she started wrestling with him. I was getting a bit panicky and thinking, oh no, what do we do? And he started to point this gun in towards Lynn and fire it, and it sounded like a pop gun. And I said to him, please leave us alone, we're students from England, we haven't got any money, we're not here for long, this sort of stuff. Because I couldn't think of any other way to appeal to him, because I just thought if I could just reason with him, maybe he'd leave us alone. Lynn managed to overpower him to the extent that they broke free of each other, and he ran round the other side of the car and picked my handbag up and started running, my handbag and my camera, and started running off into the night. I wasn't worried about my handbag because it only had $10 in it, even though it was a new one. I was worried about the camera because the camera belonged to my dad, and he'd asked me to look after this camera. I started running after this guy, and I said, please drop the camera, it's not worth anything, and he kept on running, and I really legged it. And then I thought to myself, I'm actually catching up with him, which actually scared me a lot because I thought he could turn around any minute and shoot me. So I thought Dad would prefer me alive than the camera being, than worrying about the camera. So I went back to the rest stop. It was dark and I couldn't see Lynn anywhere, and I shouted, Lynn, where are you? And she came staggering out of the toilet, and she was covered in blood. She was like, blood was dripping down her face and down her body. And I said, Lynn, is that real blood? Because the thing was, it looked like it was only a pop gun, and I thought maybe there was some kind of gimmick and he'd popped some blood. And she goes, no, it's real blood, ring an ambulance. 4 o'clock the next morning, we were in Mississippi Hospital, and Lynn was in the bed, waiting for the doctors to see to her, and I was with her. Not long later, Dr. Hughes came, and he was head of the orthopedic department in Jackson Hospital in Mississippi. And he explained to me that Lynn was incredibly lucky, fortunate. He probably didn't use those words, but he said that because of the angle of when she was shot, her arm was up. So when they were wrestling, her arm was up. And so when the bullet went through her arm, it missed her heart, because if it had been down, it would have gone in her that way. But because it was up, it went through her arm and through the back of her shoulder. And also, at the time that the bullet went through her, her neck happened to be cricked forward, which meant that it missed her spinal column. So that was really close. Jim said that there wasn't any room for her to be operated on for the next 3 days because they were fully booked up. But he said he was going to give up his lunch hour that day to operate on her. That evening, Jim and Virginia came. Jim brought his wife and Virginia into this private room. I was in the room and I was going to sleep on the sofa at the foot of her bed. And he said to me, you know, how are you, and all the rest of it. And I was really quite abrupt in the way I answered. I said, fine. And then they said, would you like to ring your parents? And I thought, actually, I really would like to ring my parents. So at midday, I went to the telephone and I rang them up. I rang up the switchboard and I said, hello, I'd like to make a call to Cornwall, England. And they said, oh yes, Dr. Hughes' department is going to fund that. Can I have the number, please? And I gave them the number and I was connected through to Mum and Dad. Then Virginia popped over. No, she rang. I don't know whether she rang. I think she rang and said, would I like to come round for tea that evening? And I was really hungry by then, so hungry. I said, oh, that would be so lovely, thank you. So they came round to collect me, and when I went into their house, there were loads of people there, and they all got into a big circle just before dinner time. And Jim said he thanked God for delivering me safely out of the situation, and he prayed that I would come to know him personally. And a light bulb went on in my head, and I thought, these are born-again Christians. I slept in Jim and Virginia's daughter's bedroom, which was so lovely, having slept in the car and on the floor and, you know, for a few days. And in the morning, I had lovely, lovely breakfast with fresh orange juice and lovely warm toast. And they were just so kind to me and brought me in as a stranger into their house, treated me like their daughter. Anyway, just before I left, I thought I would go and thank Jim. So I went to his office, and there was this lady there who was his secretary or something, and she was saying, oh, Jim, he's such a nice man, he's such a good man. I was going, yeah. And then went into his office, and he was sitting there with the little moon specks under his eyes. And I said, Jim, I just want to say thank you so much for everything you've done. I really, really appreciate it. I'm going to, head off up to New York now. And he goes, well, I'd like to give you a couple of $100 so that you can sleep in a motel on the way back, because you've got a few stopovers, so you can sleep in a motel on the way back. And I said, that's really kind of you, but I don't want the money. I said, I'm fine, don't worry about it. And then he looked at me and he said, he wasn't crying when he said this. He said, Lisa, as a man of God, I believe that God is asking me to give you this money. He said, I want you to use it. I don't want you to leave it behind, and I don't want you to pay me back. So I gave him a really big hug, and he almost squeezed the life out of me as we left. And off I went, taking this car back up to New York. So I'd have to drive practically all day and all night. Well, all day anyway, and then sleep the night, and all day again, and then sleep the night at a motel. I got to the motel and rang Virginia, and then I started to look at this book that Jim had given me, that in the flyleaf he'd written, "Dear Lisa, the present circumstances may appear to be a good story to tell at home. Look deeper. Every situation has meaning. The deeper meaning is to search out the loving God who always desires to know you in every situation. In his love, Jim and Virginia." And I went through that mentally, and I thought, do you know what? I have been looking for God all my life. I really have, but I haven't found him. And yet God has always desired to know me in every situation. And it encouraged me to look deeper, which was the perfect message for me. Because it is easy to give up on God, but he doesn't give up on us. And I felt very humbled that all of this had to happen to me to make me realise that he loved me. Anyway, I didn't quite get why he'd written in his love with a capital H. And then I thought, well, he must be talking about Jesus' love. And I thought, well, and it was then that it dawned on me that it was Jesus living in Jim and Virginia, that he was able to express his love through Jim and Virginia, and that Jesus was alive and actually lived in people who believed in him. And I'd never realised that before. I always thought Jesus was dead and gone to be with the Father. I didn't actually realise he gave his Spirit to live within people. And not only that, I'd actually felt Jesus' love. I felt it firsthand, and when I realised what had been going on, this overwhelming love just poured over me. And I realised that Jesus was real, and I thought, well, I've got to make a decision about my life now, because this changes everything. I got to JFK Airport, ready to take my flight back home, and I got there and I saw Lynn walking towards me. And I said, "Lynn, how did you get here? What happened?" And she said, "Well, after you left, Jim and Virginia took me into their home, they looked after me, and then they've paid for me personally out of their own funds to fly first class from Jackson to New York to catch this flight with you back home. And," she said, "we're both to sit in first class because he's given me a doctor's note that no one is allowed to jab my arm, and if you're sitting next to me, you can protect me." I was like, this is amazing. I can't believe this. So we tried to be upgraded to first class, but actually all the first class tickets had gone, but we got club class. So we were still really pleased. So anyway, I got on the plane and I gave my life to the Lord at that point. I said, I just said, to God that I was sorry for everything I'd done and that I wanted to live for him. And I was a little bit gutted by the fact that my mum, who had also become a Christian, who became a Christian when I was about 15, would be, there, I told you, because she's a bit like that. But I had to face that music, and I did, and she was right. There is a God, and he is real. And since that time, I've lived for Jesus to the best of my ability, I hope.